This morning my phone lit up with 29 missed calls from an unknown number. The log looked like a heartbeat gone wrong. 3:12 a.m., 3:13, 3:15, then a quiet stretch before another flurry at 4:07. I watched the screen the way you watch the ocean right before a storm, counting waves, waiting for one that finally climbs the shore and takes something you can't get back. By the time the sun crept into my kitchen window, I had decided not to call back. Because I already knew who it was, and I already knew what they'd say. How do I know? Because patterns never really end. They just learn new disguises. To understand why 29 rings can feel like a fist on your life, you need to know about the games I grew up playing. My parents loved games. Not Monopoly or charades, not puzzles on the coffee table or movie trivia. They loved the kind where the rules were never written down, and the only prize was their approval. Bright as a stage light, hot as a fever, and always just out of reach. Dad called it building grit. Mom called it tough love. I learned to call it normal because calling it anything else made it too hard to breathe. The games began small. When I was 6, they left me on our porch during a thunderstorm with a kitchen timer and told me to wait 5 minutes before knocking. I made it to 4 minutes and 32 seconds before lightning folded the sky in half. When Mom finally opened the door, she smiled like I was a puppy who'd almost learned to sit. Almost, she said, wiping rain from my hair with a dish towel. You were almost brave. Almost. That word became a mirror I couldn't stop looking into, trying to find the missing piece of my face. At 7, the game moved to the grocery store. They'd dart around corners and hide behind displays. If I cried, I lost. If I found them, I won. Once, I didn't spot Dad crouched behind a tower of paper towels, so he stayed there until my lower lip trembled and my eyes filled. He stepped out slow, disappointment already arranged on his face. Come on, Amelia, he said. You're smart. Try harder. The name is mine, by the way, Amelia, a name I used to love because of Amelia Earhart. A flyer. A woman who didn't wait. A woman who carved maps into the air. Funny, the names we believe in. At 8, the game moved farther. They dropped me at the edge of a state park and told me to find the car at the parking lot through the trees. Listen for the road, Dad said, as though the world wouldn't lie, as though roads were always honest. I found the car by the smell of oil and the hot tick of the engine cooling against dusk. When I pulled the passenger door open, Mom was filming me on her phone. I smiled. I hugged her. She turned the camera toward herself for a second, as if capturing her own pride was more important than the fact that I was shaking. I have other memories people tell me are ordinary, and maybe they are. A tooth that fell out into a glass of orange juice. A teacher who used lavender hand cream and said I drew trees like ballet dancers. The boy next door, Noah, who gave me a friendship bracelet out of blue yarn and called it a bravery band. When I snapped it by accident, I tied the ends around my wrist again and again until it became a knotted, soft rope. I never told him. Something's breaking is a private weather. Mom was beautiful the way a magazine page is beautiful, flat and glossy, and you can't touch it without leaving fingerprints that ruin it. She wore lipstick the color of pomegranates and a gold bracelet that clicked like a metronome when she tapped the steering wheel. She had a laugh that could fill a house and also empty it at the same time. Dad was big in the way men are big in old movies, broad shoulders, forearms like an old ship's ropes. His hair was dark and always slightly damp from a shower or sweat or rain. It made him look like he'd just come in from doing something important, even if he hadn't. People liked them. Cashiers leaned forward when they spoke. Waiters tried harder. Teachers assumed we were the kind of family that took vacations in tasteful cabins with board games and cocoa, not the kind who measured love with stopwatches. When you're a kid, you don't think there is something wrong. You think there is something wrong with me. You rearrange yourself to fit the shape of the house you live in. So I learned to run faster, to swallow tears, to smile in the safe way, the way that said, see, I can keep up. And every time I passed one of their tests, they raised the bar and I jumped, and they raised it again. There were good days too, and sometimes I think those were the worst. Dad hooped at my school science fair when my baking soda volcano erupted exactly when it should. Mom braided my hair so gently, I fell asleep sitting up. We drove to the coast once and bought hot fish and chips and ate them on a bench while seagulls yelled at the wind. Dad told a story about a fisherman who found a bottle with a map inside, and Mom listened with her chin on her hand and her eyes soft. And for 20 minutes, we were a family anyone would envy. After driving home, Dad said, "You did good today, Amelia." He said it like praise was a birthday. I stored those days like foil-wrapped candies in a drawer. You wouldn't live on them, but sometimes the taste kept you going. We didn't live far from Granton Central Station, a place that always smelled like hot metal and coffee. The building was old, brick on the outside and green glass on the inside, a ribcage of beams holding up the ceiling. On rainy days, water dripped from places it shouldn't, and the floor stripes shone like the backs of fish. I loved it. It felt like a place where the future passed through every hour and didn't mind if you got a little on you. Dad liked to take me there on Saturdays to practice navigation, his words. We'd stand under the departure board and he'd say, "Okay, how would you get to Maple Ridge by noon?" I'd frown at the times, the platform numbers, the little stars that meant subject to delay, and I'd plot routes in my head and then tell him, proud, like I had invented trains. Sometimes he clapped. Sometimes he didn't. The first time I got the answer wrong, he took us home early. It was the same feeling as when a carnival ride stops before you're ready. Dizzy, cheated, slightly ashamed for wanting more. When I was 10, he bought me a pocket compass at a hardware store. It came in a cardboard sleeve with a drawing of a mountain on it. The needle swung to north like a magnet had kissed it. "Now you'll always know where you are," he said, handing it to me, as if north were the same thing as home. I kept the compass in my backpack. I used to take it out at recess and turn in a circle to watch the needle pivot. The playground was a map then. The swings were east, the hopscotch square south, the brick wall where the bigger kids loitered west. Noah would stand beside me, arms crossed, pretending to be unimpressed. "What if north changes its mind?" he'd ask. "It doesn't," I'd say, confident in exactly one fact, the way kids are. He squinted at the sky like maybe he'd catch the earth spinning. Good, because I'm terrible with directions. When I tell people now about the station, I feel them assembling a picture too fast. The tracks like metal veins, the passengers with their rolling suitcases, the pigeons under the benches, my parents' faces tilted hard in the fluorescent light. But it didn't happen in a snapshot. It happened in a series of small moments anyone could mistake for normal if they weren't paying attention. It was August. Another forgettable Tuesday the color of old paper. The heat had been sitting on the town for a week, and tempers were fraying. Neighbors arguing over parking spaces, dogs barking at nothing, grocery store lines turning into tiny battlefields. That morning, Mom burned toast and swore under her breath, and Dad couldn't find his wallet and accused me of moving it, which I hadn't, which didn't matter. "Let's go out," Mom said finally, pressing her fingers to her temples. "Some air will do us good." "Station?" Dad asked, already pulling on his shoes. He had that look he got when he suddenly remembered who he liked being, clever, in charge, the leader of an expedition only he understood. I didn't tell them I had a summer reading report due on Thursday. I didn't tell them my stomach had hurt all week, the kind of ache that felt like a hand around something delicate. Instead, I nodded and went to get my backpack. The compass was in its spot, cool in my palm, its face scratched from being loved. In the car, Mom rolled the windows down and let the wind mess up her hair. Dad drummed his fingers on the steering wheel to music only he could hear. I sat in the back and tried to match the rhythm of his tapping with my breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, come borrowed from a man who would never share it. We parked on the top level of the garage. From there, you can see the tracks like lines on a palm, the way they split and braid and disappear into the distance. Ugly pigeons strutted along the concrete barriers. Dad tossed one a piece of gum and laughed when it pecked, and then recoiled, offended. Inside the station, the air changed. Cooler, smells layered like sentences, coffee, oil, wet wool, denim, something sweet, something sour. The departure board clicked. I love that sound. It was like the building was thinking. Dad walked faster, and I matched him, small feet in fast shoes. Mom fell half a step behind, looking at her phone, her bracelet ticking time. We passed a man asleep with his hat over his face, a girl my age dragging a suitcase that looked twice as heavy as it was, a woman with a baby whose cheeks glowed like someone had held them up to a candle. At the kiosk, Dad bought a bottle of water and handed it to me. "Hydrate," he said, like he'd heard a word and wanted to try it out on his tongue. Mom bought a lemon muffin and tore it into careful halves, then quarters, then eighths, eating little bites like she was rationing sugar for winter. We stood under the board. The trains were late, as they always are when you're trying to measure a day by them. Dad pointed. "Maple Ridge is track 6, he said, "but it jumps sometimes." He knelt to my height, his voice dropping into that stage whisper he used when the game started. "So, what's the smarter play, Amelia? Wait by 6, or watch the board and move when it changes?" "Watch the board," I said, chest warm with the answer. He grinned. "Atta girl." Mom patted my shoulder. "You're getting quick," she said, a small spotlight. I stood under it until it moved on. People say you can sense the moment your life splits. I don't know about sensing, but I can name it. The second the intercom crackled and a voice said there'd been a platform switch, and Dad's eyes lit the way they did when the world confirmed his private rules. "Let's race," he said. "Track 3. You know the route." I knew the route. Left past the magazine stand with the torn Vogue cover, down the wide stairs where the tiles were loose, and you had to watch your step, hairpin right by the vending machines that never gave change. The crowd moved like a slow river, and Dad slid through it too fast. I followed, the water closing around me, Mom's perfume a strand of scent behind us. By the time we reached track 3, breathless, the platform was already thick with travelers. Dad looked like a man at the edge of a diving board. The train sighed in, brakes squealing, doors yawning open. He checked his watch, which he didn't wear, so he patted his bare wrist and nodded at the timing anyway, satisfied. "Okay," he said, quiet, conspiratorial. "New level." Mom tilted her head, as if this was news to her too, and maybe it was. Maybe he kept these levels in a private drawer. "New level." I repeated, the words tasting like electricity. He put his hands on my shoulders, strong and warm. "We're going to step away for a minute," he said. "Just over there." He nodded to the far end of the platform, where a column wore a poster of a beach no one could afford to visit. "We'll be in sight. You, my little navigator, are going to read the signs, watch the flow, and tell us when the train to Maple Ridge is boarding. You'll make the call." His grin was big and bright, and for me alone. "You'll be in charge." In charge. It felt like someone had cut a star out of the sky and pressed it into my palm. I knew the answers. I knew the numbers. I knew how to make the world line up by watching it carefully enough. I wanted more than air, more than sugar, more than a new sketchbook to make them proud. "Okay," I said, trying to sound older. "I can do that." Mom kissed the top of my head.
2 minutes, she said.
"Count it." They moved away, and I moved into the space they left, a little bubble in the current. I watched the board. Fingers, rings, wrists, magazines. I watched the train doors open and spit out people who looked relieved or lost. I watched the conductor's hand lift as he checked the gap. An old woman asked me if I knew where the restrooms were, and I pointed, and she smiled like I was a signpost. 2 minutes can be an hour if you give it enough attention. The intercom whispered names and numbers, some familiar, some like cities and stories. I saw Dad lean to say something to Mom, saw Mom laugh, saw the gold bracelet flash. I counted under my breath. 57, 58, 59. Track 3 for Maple Ridge now boarding. I turned, bright with victory, ready to lift my arm and call them over, ready to be the arrow that points the way. I lifted my hand. I saw them see me. Dad nodded, that proud nod that wasn't heavy or rare this time, but light, immediate, clean as rain. He took Mom's hand, and then, in a movement so simple it could be a trick of memory, they stepped onto the train.
"Dad,"
I said out loud, too small to rise above the platform noise. My voice pinballed around my head, not really mine anymore. He turned, 1 foot inside, 1 foot out, like the border between 2 countries. He smiled at me through the doorway. "You've got this," he mouthed. The doors chimed. The conductor raised a gloved hand. My compass felt heavy in my backpack, a coin that wouldn't spend. Mom lifted her fingers in a wave, the lemon muffin bag crinkling in her other hand. She formed words too. Words I know now were supposed to be playful, light, the way you tell a dog to stay while you take 3 steps backward. Let's see how she finds her way home. The door slid shut with that soft gasp, like a sleeper turning in bed. For a second, exactly one, I believed it was still a game. That this was the test I'd been training for in aisles and forests and thunderstorms. That when I passed, they would explode with pride, confetti cannons in their chests. The train lurched. The platform moved. No, the train moved, and the platform pretended not to. Dad's face dissolved into the glare on the window. Mom's bracelet became a line of light, and then nothing. The car doors an eyelid closing. Wait. I tried. The word useless, a lamppost at noon. The train slid away, slow, slower than slow, then suddenly fast, and my reflection rippled across its windows like someone else's life. The wind it left behind lifted my hair, and then put it down again. People rearranged. Someone laughed, unrelated. A man bent to pick up a dropped ticket and swore. A pigeon landed near my shoe and cocked its head at me, as if I might have crumbs. I stood there with my hand still tied to the air where I'd waved. I stood there long enough for the cold from the concrete to climb my legs. The board clicked again. The building thought another thought. 2 minutes, Mom had said. 2 minutes is a story you tell a child because it sounds manageable, because it sounds like a song. But there are minutes that stretch, minutes that become bridges over canyons, minutes that turn you into someone else. I lowered my arm. I took a breath that tasted like steel. I looked at the board. I looked at the compass. I turned slowly, as if facing north would fix it. Far down the platform, a station attendant in a blue vest was chatting with a woman about stroller wheels. Behind me, the stairs waited like a mouth. To my left, a vending machine flashed an error code, a tiny red distress call in its square heart. I thought of Noah's bracelet, long gone now, tied and retied until it frayed to soft dust. What if North changes its mind? He'd asked. I'd said it doesn't. I had been so sure. Somewhere, high above the station roof, a gull screamed like a hinge. The sound spread, thin and wild, and for a moment the station wasn't a station. It was a coastline, and I was standing where water meets rock, doing math with tides. I could stay. I could sit on the bench with the man who slept, rest my head on a suitcase, pretend I was traveling too. I could go to the information desk and tell the woman with the tidy hair that my parents had decided to test how much I could bear, and that the test was a train, and that the answer felt like a space where something used to be. I could cry. I could not. The compass needle quivered, not because north had moved, but because my hands weren't steady. I turned my face toward the concourse and stepped into the flow of strangers. I wasn't thinking about what would happen in 20 years. I wasn't thinking about a log of missed calls, a phone buzzing on a kitchen counter, like a trapped bee. I wasn't thinking about the way history loops back when it wants to. I was only thinking about the space between the place you are and the place you refuse to go back to, about the gravity of doors closing, about the kind of girl a train station makes out of you when it has to. I started walking. By noon today, the missed calls had stopped. A silence after a storm is not peace. It's the sky catching its breath. I set the phone face down and let the screen go black, because if I watched it light again I might answer, and if I answered I might hear voices I've trained myself to live without. Back then, on the day they stepped onto the train, I didn't know how to name any of that. I just knew the platform where I was standing had turned into a math problem with too many answers. I left track 3 and drifted with the crowd to the concourse, the compass a flat coin in my backpack, the water bottle sweating in my fist. The station felt bigger than it ever had, like it had been quietly expanding inside itself, making new rooms none of us noticed until we needed them. A woman in a yellow dress argued with a ticket machine. A boy pressed his forehead to a window and breathed clouds onto the glass. Announcements layered over each other until they were only a texture. I told myself it was a test and I was winning. I told myself if I stood in the exact right place, watched the board, counted to 100, they'd step back into view laughing, proud, relieved that I'd passed. I chose a pillar near the newsstand with a rack of crossword books and folded my body around it like I could be part of the building. 100, 200. The board clicked. The building thought different thoughts. I looked at the doorways to tracks 3, 6, and 8 until I wasn't sure which one I'd been born from. A station attendant in a blue vest walked by, carrying a bundle of those little flags they use during delays. He was older than my dad, with gray hair that looked soft and a face that didn't panic easily. He slowed when he saw me on my own. "You all right there?" he asked, friendly but not too friendly. I nodded. Then I realized nodding can look like lying, so I made myself say, "My parents are getting coffee." He glanced at the kiosk, 2 people in line, no one who looked like they had my face, and then back at me. "You need anything?" "No, thank you." "Okay. Stay where you can see the screens. If you need help, I'll be around." He tapped his radio and kept moving, swallowing the distance with practice steps. I breathed. I went to the kiosk and bought nothing. I stood by the map of routes and pretended to study all the places I wasn't going. I walked the length of the concourse and back, slow, as if I were carrying a full bowl of water and any quick movement would spill it. Minutes do strange things when you don't know what they're for. Somewhere behind my ribs, a buzzer sounded, and then shut off, and then sounded again. I told myself to try track 3 once more, just to be sure. The platform had changed shape without moving. New faces, new bags, a sharp smell of brakes, a cooler wind. I leaned over the edge to look down the line and saw sunlight turning the rails to white wires that ran out of town and into heat haze. A girl about my age was sitting on the bench with her mother, swinging her feet. She was showing her a keychain shaped like a dolphin. The mother looked at her the way people in commercials look at things, soft, amused, fully present. I thought, wildly, that I could sit next to them and borrow that look for a minute. Not the mother, just the look. I didn't move. You can't borrow what is built for someone else. I checked the board because that's what I knew how to do. I checked my compass because habit expects to be fed. I told myself I could wait one more train, and if they weren't on it, then I'd find the attendant and ask for help. And if asking for help meant losing the game, then I would accept the loss like a person who had done their best. Another Maple Ridge came and went without me. The sound of the doors opening and closing began to feel like a language I couldn't learn. Around me, people did regular things. Someone tied a shoe. Someone answered a phone and said, "I'm here." A pigeon dragged a bright string and believed it was food. It takes time for a thought to grow a spine. Mine did slowly. What if there wasn't a game? What if the game was that there is no game? What if this was not a test I could pass, but a decision they had already made? The word social made my stomach tighten. The word worker made it loosen. "I don't want to go back," I said. It was very quiet when I said it, but also incredibly loud. "I heard you." Ruth didn't touch me. She reached for the phone. "We'll start with Lena. You can decide what to say and what not to say. You are allowed to keep anything of yourself that you want. Even my name? Especially that." She paused. "Do you want to keep it?" I looked at the compass on her necklace, then thought of the one in my backpack. Names are navigation too. "Maybe not all of it," I said, surprising myself. She smiled. "Okay, we'll start with Mia." The decision unlatched something in my ribs. It didn't make me safe, not yet, it made me real. Lena arrived at closing time, carrying the smell of outside and the ineffable authority of someone who has done more paperwork than any villain or saint. She was in her 30s, with sleeves rolled to her elbows and a tattoo of a little house near her wrist. She crouched to my eye level and said, "Hi, Mia. I'm here because Ruth says you asked for help. I work for Family Services, which is a very boring name for a job that sometimes matters. Is it okay if I sit with you for a bit?" "Yes," I said, because she'd asked and then waited for my answer like it mattered. She didn't say what happened. She said, "Tell me only what you want to say tonight. We can do the rest tomorrow or not at all, depending on what you want." I told her I didn't want to go home. I told her I had a compass and could tell where north was, but that wasn't the same as safety. I told her about the station without saying the words they left me. She nodded as if she'd been to many stations and believed everything I was saying. "I'm going to take you to a place to sleep," Lena said finally. "It's not forever. It's a good place for tonight. Tomorrow, we can choose a better place. And if you change your mind in the morning, you're allowed to say so." "Will you tell them?" I asked. "The people who left you?" She didn't flinch. "I can't tell people I don't know. I can file a report to see if someone's reported of a missing child. If someone is looking, we'll know. And if no one is, then we will still know," she said. "And we will act accordingly." She let me ride in the front seat of her car. She showed me where the seatbelt sat best, so it didn't choke you when you breathed. Ruth locked the bookstore and pressed a wrapped cookie into my pocket with a look like she was making a promise to the world. At the shelter, the night smelled like laundry and something lemon. A woman with a braid so thick it looked like rope showed me a room with 2 beds, a window that latched, and a poster of mountains that had the word explore under them, as if exploration could be a command. She handed me a toothbrush in plastic like a present and pointed to a shelf of pajamas in the universal colors of donated cloth. "Bathroom's there," she said. "If you want to keep your shoes on the first night, do it." I did. I showered until the water ran cold and then wore a t-shirt that said Camp Treetop 1998 because it was soft. I tucked my compass under my pillow and stared at the ceiling while the noises of the building arranged themselves into a map. Footsteps, a cart's wheel that needed oil, someone laughing down the hall like they'd found a joke late and were glad anyway. At some point, sleep took me hard and fast. In the middle of it, I half woke to the sound of a phone ringing at the office, then another. I thought it was the station. I thought it was the house we used to live in. I thought it was a train. Morning was a square of light on the floor and the smell of coffee that wasn't mine. Lena met me in a small office with a plant that had lived through everything. "No missing child report," she said, voice even, hands still. "No one has called about you. It is a rare thing to have your fear confirmed and feel lighter." My lungs filled all the way for the first time since the doors closed. Not happy, not safe, just true. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she echoed. "Then we build forward." I nodded. "And because I am, in certain ways, my father's daughter," I asked, "what's the plan?" Lena smiled like a person who likes a map. "We get you a guardian who is made of actual safety. We enroll you in a new school where the tests happen on paper. We pick a last name for the paperwork that you can change later if you want. We teach anyone who needs to know how to say Mia without making it feel like an error." I touched the compass through my pocket. "North," I said, mostly to myself. "North," she agreed. That was the day I didn't go back. Not to the station, not to the house whose porch light I had learned to read like weather, not to the rules whose only prize was permission to try again. That night, in a bed that still smelled like someone else's soap, I decided to be a person who writes the directions on her own hands. 2 decades later, my phone breathed light in the dark and spelled out a number I didn't know. 29 times. I thought of doors sliding shut. I thought of a bookstore bell. The thing about patterns is they don't die, they wait. But so do people. So do girls who rename themselves and learn to sleep with both eyes closed. This morning, I made coffee and watched the phone not ring. I am not 10. I am not waiting on a platform. And still, the body remembers the shape of a test. I picked it up, finally, not to answer, but to listen to the voicemails I had avoided. There were 3. The first was static and breath, and a woman saying my old name like it had teeth. The second was a man clearing his throat like he was about to deliver a verdict. The third was a voice I recognized only because it didn't belong anywhere in my life and therefore had to be real. "Amelia? It's your mother. Please. We need to talk." I set the phone down very carefully, as if it were a small, live animal. Outside, a bus sighed. Somewhere, a train took a breath before it moved. I am not on the platform. I am not a rule someone else made. But I know what north is. And I know what happens when doors close. When people imagine a child rescued, they picture safety arriving like sunlight through curtains, warm, clean, and immediate. The truth is closer to shadow than light. Safety doesn't arrive. It limps. It tests the floorboards before it steps inside. I learned that in my first foster home. Lena had promised me someone made of actual safety. What she meant was a couple in their 40s with a tidy house and a belief in second chances. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They were kind, the way kindness feels when it isn't sure if it will last. They gave me a bedroom with yellow curtains and a dresser that smelled faintly of cedar. On the first night, Mrs. Carter left a nightlight plugged into the wall, a small blue glow. But when she closed the door, the shadow of the dresser looked too much like the station pillars, and I sat up until my eyes hurt. At school, I was the new girl. Kids whispered because kids always whisper. Some asked questions in blunt, accidental cruelty. Where are your parents? Did you get taken away? Did you do something bad? I don't play games, I told one boy when he shoved me during recess. My voice shook, but it landed. He left me alone. The Carters weren't cruel, but they didn't understand the silences I carried. When Dad raised his voice in the driveway because the garbage hadn't been taken out, my body reacted before my mind did. I dropped my fork and pressed my palms flat to the table. Mrs. Carter put her hand over mine gently. It's all right, Mia. No one's leaving. I wanted to believe her. I nodded, but that night I slept with shoes on, just in case. The Carters couldn't keep me long. Foster care works on time the way tides work, pulling in and pulling out without asking. I moved through 3 more homes over the next 5 years. Each one had its own smell, its own rules, its own version of kindness or indifference. At the Harisa's house, kindness came in casseroles. Mrs. Harris cooked as if food could fix everything.
Sometimes it did.
Sometimes it only made the silence heavier. At the Rodriguez home, I learned noise. They had 4 other kids, 2 dogs, and a kitchen that never closed. It was chaos, and it made my heart ache in ways I didn't expect. The first time Mr. Rodriguez raised his voice, it was to yell at the dog for chewing shoes. I froze. He saw me, realized, and immediately softened his voice. Not you, kiddo. You're safe. That was the first time a grown man's anger didn't feel like a weapon aimed at me. And then there was foster number 4, Evelyn. She was a retired teacher with a spine like an oak and a heart that didn't demand anything in return. Evelyn had one rule: no disappearing acts. If you're leaving, tell me. If you're angry, tell me. If you're scared, tell me. But don't vanish. It was the first time I realized I had been living as if vanishing was the only way to survive. By 14, I was tall enough to pass as older and quiet enough to pass as invisible. But I also discovered something I hadn't expected: anger. It sat behind my ribs like a second heart. When classmates mocked kids who couldn't afford new shoes, I snapped, sharp as glass. When teachers treated me as fragile, I corrected them with precision. I'm not broken. I'm just moving differently. Evelyn encouraged it, but with boundaries. She enrolled me in debate club, saying, "Learn to put your fire into words, Mia. Words don't bruise the way fists do, but they leave longer scars." I took her advice. By 16, I was the girl who could out-argue the boys who thought shouting was the same as winning. It was a kind of survival. Still, nights were the worst. Some nights I dreamed of the station. The sound of the intercom. The way the doors closed with that soft hiss. In the dreams, I always shouted louder, ran faster, grabbed their hands before they could slip away. I always woke with my fingers curled so tight my nails left half-moon scars in my palms. I never told Evelyn the whole story. She knew pieces: bad parents, neglect, tests. But I never gave her the station. That felt like a secret I had to keep, because if I told it out loud, it might make it real forever. College was never promised, but I made it happen. Evelyn filled out forms with me, driving me to interviews in her old sedan. She cried when I got accepted to a state university 3 hours away. "Call me," she said at drop-off, handing me a care package with more tissues than food. "I will." And I did. At least, at first. But college was another kind of noise: fraternity parties, professors who didn't know your name, roommates who complained about parents who loved them too much. I studied psychology because I wanted to understand how the human brain could twist love into games. I wanted to know if what my parents did had a name. Sometimes, in lectures about trauma, I felt the professor was secretly telling my story back to me. Abandonment, attachment wounds, hypervigilance, words like road signs pointing to a place I had already lived. By 23, I was Mia everywhere. Amelia had been folded and tucked away like a dress that no longer fit. I interned at a youth shelter, helping kids who arrived with garbage bags full of clothes and eyes full of storms. I was good at it, not because I was trained, but because I recognized the look. I knew what it was to stand at a threshold and not know which way was survival. I dated, but never seriously. Trust was a currency I didn't spend easily. A man named Chris once told me I had walls like a fortress. I smiled and said, "Fortresses keep people alive." By 27, I had an apartment with a door that locked, a bookshelf filled with secondhand novels, and a plant I hadn't killed yet. To the outside world, I looked like a woman who had outrun her past. Inside, though, I still measured silence in minutes, still woke from dreams where a train pulled away and left me breathless. I thought 20 years was enough time to turn ghosts into dust. But time doesn't erase, it archives. And sometimes, the archive calls you back. It was a Wednesday morning when my phone rang for the first time. Unknown number. I silenced it. Then it rang again. And again. By dawn, there were 29 missed calls. The first voicemail used my old name. The second cleared its throat like my father. The third was a woman whispering, "Amelia, please. It's your mother. We need to talk." The fortress inside me trembled, but it didn't fall. Not yet. The human brain has a cruel talent. It recognizes voices before the mind agrees to listen. When I heard that voicemail, every cell in me went still. "Amelia, please. It's your mother. We need to talk." Her voice hadn't aged the way I expected. It wasn't fragile or broken by years. It was sharp, like glass kept in a drawer. For a second, I was 10 again, standing on the station platform with a compass in my pocket and nothing to point to. I deleted the message. My thumb shook on the screen. And then the phone rang again. I was 29 now, living in a small apartment above a bakery that always smelled like sugar at dawn. I had built walls out of routine: morning coffee, evening walks, case files stacked neatly at work, friends who knew me as Mia, not Amelia. I'd convinced myself the past was a book I'd already shelved. But ghosts don't respect shelving. They scratch at the spine until you take them down again. That morning, I left my apartment like normal, but every sound felt suspicious. The rumble of buses, the scrape of shoes on the sidewalk, the hiss of the espresso machine downstairs. Everything seemed like it was disguising another sound. The sound of a door opening behind me. At work, my colleague Jordan noticed. "You good, Mia? You look like you just saw a ghost." "Not a ghost," I said before I could stop myself. "A train." He laughed, confused. I didn't explain. By lunchtime, the number had called 12 more times. Finally, I answered, because fear is exhausting. "Hello." Silence. Then a breath, the kind that tries to reach across distance. "Amelia." My father's voice. Older, rougher, but still carrying that authority he thought was love. "We found you." My throat closed. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles hurt. "Don't call me that. You're our daughter."
No.
"I was your game." Silence again, then softer. "We were wrong. We thought. You thought leaving a 10-year-old alone in a station was a joke." My voice rose sharp enough that Jordan looked over from his desk. I turned away. "Do you even know what happened after that day?" "We looked for you," he said quickly. "Too quickly. We came back. You weren't there." I waited. My chest burned. I waited until waiting turned into leaving. There was shuffling on the other end, and then her voice. My mother's. "Amelia, please. I know we failed you, but we need you now. Your father, he's sick. We don't have anyone else." The words hit me like a cold wind. Need. Not love. Not regret. Need. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with the compass in my palm. I'd kept it all these years, tucked in a box of things I never showed anyone. The needle quivered gently, pointing north as if nothing had ever changed. What if north changes its mind? Noah's voice from childhood echoed. I thought about calling Evelyn, my last foster mother, who still mailed me Christmas cards. I thought about calling Lena, who once said, "You're allowed to keep anything of yourself you want." But in the end, I only stared at the compass and asked it questions it couldn't answer. Should I see them? Should I forgive them? Do I owe them anything at all? The compass spun slightly, then stilled. It didn't care. North was north. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. Not frantic, not polite, measured. A rhythm I knew. My father used to knock that way when I hid under the bed during storms. 3 short, 1 long. I froze. Mia? A voice through the wood. Not a neighbor. Not a stranger. My name, my new name, carried in the old cadence. I didn't open it. I pressed my back against the door until the knocking stopped. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty except for a slip of paper under the mat. "We just want to see you.
Coffee. Please. Tomorrow."
Granton Station Cafe. Of course. The station. The next morning, against all logic, I went. Not because I wanted to, but because the part of me that had been abandoned needed to see what 20 years had done to them. Needed to know if they were still the monsters in my memory, or just tired people who had lost control of the game they created. The cafe inside Granton Station hadn't changed much. Same chip tables, same smell of burnt espresso. I sat in a corner booth, my heart pounding so loud I thought people could hear it. And then they walked in. My father first. Older, thinner, with a limp in his left leg. His hair had gone silver, but his shoulders still carried that weight of authority. My mother followed, her beauty faded but not gone, her bracelet still on her wrist, clicking like a metronome. They saw me,
Froze.
then smiled, hesitant, too wide. "Amelia," my mother whispered. "Mia," I corrected. For a moment, we only stared. 3 people with the same blood but different histories. Finally, my father spoke. "We made mistakes." I laughed, sharp and hollow. "Mistakes are forgetting a birthday. You left me to see if I could survive." "We thought you'd follow," he said, voice breaking. "We thought it would toughen you. But when we came back, you were gone." "You didn't come back fast enough," I said. My hands shook under the table. "You didn't come back for me. You came back to check if your experiment worked." They both flinched. Truth can bruise even the people who threw the first punch. My mother leaned forward, eyes wet. "Please, Mia. We can't change the past. But your father's sick. We need family."
I stared at them.
Family. The word felt like glass in my mouth. "You need something from me again," I said. "The difference is I don't owe you this test." The first meeting didn't end in reconciliation. It ended with silence, the kind that follows a storm but promises another. I left the cafe before they could follow. My mother called after me, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard, but I didn't turn back. I walked through Granton Station, through the echoing concourse where the boards still clicked like the teeth of time, and I kept walking until the air outside felt safe enough to breathe. That night, the calls began again.
Not 1.
Not 2. 29. Each ring was a hand dragging me back into a past I had fought to escape. On the 7th voicemail, my mother's voice was steady. "Mia, we didn't come back for you that day. We didn't think you'd last more than an hour.
We wanted to teach you something."
We told ourselves it was about strength. But the truth is, we were selfish. We wanted to see how far you'd go to win us back. We thought you would run after us. And when you didn't," she broke off, static filling the silence. "When you didn't, we didn't know how to explain what we'd done. So we told ourselves a story, that you'd been taken, that we were victims too." On the 10th voicemail, my father spoke. His voice had thinned, broken by illness. "Mia, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I don't want to leave this world without telling you I was wrong. I was wrong to think love was earned through tests. I see now it was cowardice, not strength. I see it every night." On the 29th, the final voicemail, My mother's voice returned. He doesn't have much time. If you hate me forever, fine. If you never want to see me again, fine. But if you could just once come. Not for him.
For you.
So you'll know you said everything you needed to say. I sat on my apartment floor again, the compass in my palm, the voicemails burning in my ear. North still pointed where it always had, but my life was split in two directions. The road forward, where they were only ghosts, and the road back, where I confronted them before death made it impossible. Anger roared in me, but underneath it was something worse. The fear that silence would follow me for the rest of my life. That their voices, recorded and unfinished, would play in my head like the click of the departure board. At dawn, I packed a bag. Not much. Just clothes, the compass, and a notebook. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. I didn't want them to follow my steps this time. The hospital was gray, sterile, smelling of bleach and endings. I found my father in a narrow bed, wires curling from his chest like roots. He looked smaller, like someone had folded him in half and forgotten how to unfold him again. My mother sat at his side, bracelet still clicking, but her face was pale, lined, older than I remembered. When she saw me, she stood, hands trembling. Mia? I raised mine. Don't call me Amelia. She nodded.
Mia.
My father's eyes opened. For a moment, I thought he might not recognize me. But then he whispered, North. The word punched the air from my lungs. The compass in my pocket grew heavy. You always knew where to go, he said, voice thin as paper. Better than we ever did. I wanted to scream, to throw 20 years of pain at him. But instead, I stood still, letting silence weigh the room. You left me, I said finally, not just at the station. You left me every time you made love into a game. Every time you chose cruelty over care. I survived not because of you, but in spite of you. He closed his eyes. A tear slipped down. I know. And now you want me here to give you peace. My voice shook. You never gave me any.
He didn't argue.
Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because he finally knew he had no right. My mother wept quietly, but I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed on him, the man who taught me abandonment as if it were love. After a long silence, I leaned closer. You don't get forgiveness from me, but you get truth. You failed me, and I lived anyway. For the first time in my life, I saw his face soften into something like surrender. He died 2 nights later. I didn't attend the funeral. I walked instead to Granton Station, stood at track 3, and watched a train pull away. My reflection rippled in its windows just as it had when I was 10. But this time I didn't freeze. I didn't wait for anyone to come back. I turned, walked to the concourse, and bought a ticket north. As the train carried me away, I took the compass from my pocket. The needle quivered, steady, certain. For the first time, I realized north had never been about direction. It was about survival, about choosing where to go when no one chooses you. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and let the past shrink behind me. This morning, my phone still shows 29 missed calls. But I don't need to answer anymore. Some tests aren't worth taking. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. And me, I'm not lost. I'm Mia, and I've already found my way home.